My name is Gift Egwenu, and today I'm doing a Learn with Gift episode. This is where I actually learn a new technology with my audience, and yeah, that's pretty much it. In my last video, I talked a bit about this challenge where I want to try learning a new thing while making a video about it as well. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to dive right in. On Pluralsight, I am obviously using Pluralsight for this, like I mentioned. On Pluralsight, I created something called a channel, which will help me curate all the things, all the courses that I'm looking to learn. And I really like it because it's pretty useful. So what you can do here is add content that you want to learn and have them all grouped into one collection or a channel, as it is called, so you can easily get back to it. You can easily find it whenever you want to learn. So if you notice, mine is most of the courses that I have here are related to data. This is because I am now working in a data related field, and part of my day-to-day job involves me working with data, and this is a field that I had no previous experience in, so I'm trying to level up and put up my skills in this area. But today specifically, I want us to go into data visualization fundamentals with D3.js. Now let's get right into what D3.js is and what it does. D3 is a JavaScript library that is used for manipulating documents based on data, and it helps you bring your data to life using HTML, SVG, and CSS. Also, you can also use HTML canvas, but that I won't be discussing today. So D3 means data-driven document. It basically means you're combining data that you have with JavaScript DOM, and you're combining these two things to bring your data into life. And we are going to see how to do that using these technologies: HTML, SVG, and CSS. Now I know the technologies that I need to know to create visualizations with D3, and the next step is to actually look through the steps that are required and the order that are required for you to create charts with D3. The first step is for you to actually prepare your data, and then the next step will be to join the data with the DOM elements, and then manipulating the DOM, creating interactions, and adding animations. These are steps you would want to follow when you're building a data visualization chart. Now let's set up D3 on our code editor. What I did here was I used the CDN package from Unpackage to import D3, and just to check that we already have this in our browser, you can run D3 to see that this is already here. We have D3 right now. So the next thing I want us to do is to actually see how we can draw a simple SVG shape and also replicate that on D3. So to draw an SVG shape, you need the SVG element, and you can see that on the browser, but I want to increase the width, say 400, the height 300. Now with SVG, you have the liberty of drawing different shapes. You can draw a line, you can draw a circle, you can add text, you can draw a couple of things. You can go as far as drawing. I've seen people draw human beings with SVG, but that is not what I'm doing in this video. We are just doing like an introduction, so we don't want to go overboard. So yeah, let me draw a line here. So with SVG line, you have the X and Y axis, so you want to specify that as well. So the X axis actually has two, the X1 and the X2. X1 is where you want it to start from, so here I'll say start from 100. Y1 is where you want the Y axis to start from 200, and X2 is where you want your, you might not see it now because I've not added a stroke, so I'm just going to add a stroke to it so it's visible. You should be able to see it now. Yeah, so x2 is where you want the x-axis to end, so I'll say it should end at 300, and y2 is where you want the y-axis to end as well. Say 200. Yeah, so now I think I would want to move this up a bit, just to say 200. X-axis. So now that we have a line here, let's try creating a circle. Now the difference with a circle is you have the x and the y with lines, but with circles you have what we call CS. And let's see, we give that 200 CY, and the radius of 3, and you can see the circle is in the middle, but because I want it to be at the beginning, I'll just give this 100. So let's also add a text. So text is basically actually text that you want to say this is a line, and position it to on top of the line. It's supposed to show, but I'm not sure why it's not showing. Okay, this is a line, it's there, but I need to add x 200. I want it just, yeah, 100. Let's see, minus 10. Yeah, I think I like it this way. So we have a simple SVG image or a simple SVG drawing by just writing out HTML like syntax. This is great, but you can have more than one of these. By the way, you can have like 2, you can have as many as you want, and this should be second line. It's on stacked on top, so I'm just going to increase the 200, 200, and 220. So it's just below that one then. So you can have as many elements, lines, circles, text, area as you want in an SVG, and you can also group them using the G tag. So you can group like this. Group this into that one. And the great thing with grouping your elements is that way you can move some of the positioning into the group elements. Say position all of them together using the transform element. So transform, let's see what this does. Transform this to 100, no, I'm not sure I'm doing this correctly. Let's see. Yeah, it works. So now what I did was to transform the x and y axis to start from 100 and the y to also start from 100. That's why you see the line moved downward. So because I already did that, I'm going to take this part out. Take it out since I already have it there, and do the same here, so you don't have like repeating. can reduce this to say 10. 10. Let's give it 20, and yeah, this is great. And then for x, say x starts at 0, and 200. Now you only need x to write, so you don't want to say 200, 300, and 300. If you want it to be at the beginning, you can do this, and then 200. You want this as well. Yeah, so we have our line back. Now let's see how we can replicate that same svg file we created using D3. So here I already selected the body element, I appended an svg file, and as you can see on the right hand side, I added an svg file, just an empty svg file that has a width 500 and a height 400. Now let's add the line, circle, and text to it. So to do that, I want to group them into the same way we did the previous one, and this is how you do that in D3. So const line equals svg now dot append g, which is the element for grouping, dot attribute transform rather, and then we can now translate it by 100. Translate 100 by 100. So with this setup, I can now say line dot append to append the line to it. Append line dot attribute x2 should be 100, and stroke, which is, let's say, style stroke black. Now we should be able to see the line. Yeah, and let's add the circle, line dot append circle, also adding this attribute c2 cx, and the radius of 3. And then lastly, what else do we want to add? We also want to add the texts. So I think I broke something here. I think I broke something. Let's see. Oh yeah, figured it out. Missing trailing comma. So this should be 100 because you want it to be I want it to be 0 instead. And then lastly, let me add the text. Attributes. I don't know why this is not doing autocomplete for me. So yeah. And then text. This is line. Yeah, so we should go under great. So usually you can choose to do SVG that way, like writing out your SVG when you're working with D3, but it might become stressful and it's a lot of work. So you can also create SVG elements, SVG shapes using D3, and this is how you go about it. Now, using what I've learned from the D3 fundamentals course on Pluralsight, I want to create a scatterplot graph using D3. And basically what I would like to show here is two metrics: the sales price versus the ground living area of apartments in the US. I found a data set with these values. So this is the data set, and it basically contains two metrics. My goal here is to plot a scatterplot graph using D3. The first thing we need to do is to add D3 library to this pen. And you do that by going to your settings and just searching for D3. It should pop up. Save, and now I have the library on the pen. To confirm that this is actually the case, I would just try and output D3 version to make sure. Great, so I have D3 in this pen. So let's move on. The next thing I want to do is to add a div for the SVG graph. So this would be a div, I'm going to call it data viz. I'll be plotting an SVG chart and appending it to this div right here. Now that I have this, the next step would be to first of all set the dimensions and the margin for the SVG. Doing this first is a great idea, so you already have like the width and the height of the SVG set, so you don't have to figure out how to do that later. And I found a very helpful way of doing this. I'm just going to start by saying const margin equals, first of all, I would like to set an object with all the margins that I need. I have the margin set. The next thing I would like to do is to set the width and the height. If I want the width to be 500 pixels, because an SVG is going to contain different parts, so you have grouped parts in an SVG, it might eventually change the margins that I've set. And if I just set 500 right now, when I add more groups, it might change the width of the SVG. So I'm going to do an extra calculation here that will minus the margin left and the margin right from the width. Also do the same for the height. Say 400 for height. I'll set the height as 400, and then I minus the margin top and bottom. Great. Now that I have this set up, the next thing I would like to do is to append the SVG object to the body of the page using D3. So the first thing I'll do is create a variable called SVG and say D3.select. So what this does is it selects the class or the ID of the element you have in your HTML, and for me that ID is data viz. So after selecting it, I want to append an SVG to to that div. So right now I have an SVG appended, but it's not obvious on the page, right? Because I've not added the width, the height. So let's go ahead and do that. Just want this to look good a bit, so it's not confusing. So I'll add attributes to the SVG. So you can add different attributes. You can add the width attributes, the height attributes. You can style it. You can do so much on an SVG element. So adding the attributes here, the attribute of width, and I want to set it to be the width that I already defined up there, plus margin left and margin right. And for the height attributes, I'm going to set it to height plus margin top plus margin bottom. Great. And then lastly, I want to add a style to it so you can see it can be visible. So I'm going to style it with the background color attribute and say this should be light gray. Great. The next thing I would like to do is to append a group element. The reason I'm doing this is because I want each level of this graph to be separated. I don't want them all to be within one SVG tag. So within SVG you have what we call the group, and it's represented with G. So I will just go ahead and do this, append G, and give this some space, and then I'll add the transform attribute to attribute, and I want to translate it using the margin left and the margin top. Great, I appended a group element to the SVG and added an attribute transform. So the next step now is to load and use our data, and I'll be using what D3 calls the CSV plugin library, D3.csv, and this can easily load a CSV file, either it's local or it's on a remote server. So because this is already hosted on GitHub, I'm just going to copy that link, and here I'll say d3.csv, the link. So this will download the SVG file using the margin left and the margin top. Just to make sure this is visible enough, I'm going to reduce the size of the CSS so we're not making use of it that much. So great, I appended a group element to the SVG and added an attribute transform. Basically what this does is it adds a margin left, translates a margin left and a margin top to all the groups. So the next step now is to load and use our data, and I'll be using what D3 calls the CSV plugin library, d3.csv, and this can easily load a CSV file, either it's local or it's on a remote server. So because this is already hosted on GitHub, I'm just going to copy that link, and here I'll say d3.csv, the link. So this will download the SVG file, and do data. So let's make sure we're receiving that data by passing it here and logging it to the console. Save, debug mode. Yeah, that's something I like on CodePen. So now if I check the console, I should see an object being returned. No, let me make sure I saved this. Let me see. Yes, this should return. M is not defined. Where is M? Line 3. It's confusing. So I think I figured the problem. I missed this plus sign here. So great. If I save this and check the console, I should receive the response which I'm receiving. Great. So we have the ground living area and the sales price being returned from the data sets here, from the raw data sets here. Now that we've gotten the data, the next step would be to add the x-axis. We want to add the x-axis, so the graph would look like, normally this is what a Scatterplot graph looks like. It has the x and the y-axis, and then it has a dot in the middle showing the correlation between the x and the y-axis, which is basically what I'm trying to plot. So typically you need two variables for a set of data, which is what I have, the living area and the sales price. So going back here, I want to plot the x-axis. The next thing I would like to do is to plot the x-axis. What I need for this to work is, say var x, I need a D3 library called scale linear, and d3.scale linear. My understanding of this, I'll just go back to the docs here. My understanding of scale linear is it helps you construct a scale with a unit domain and a unit range. So usually on an x-axis you have, like, say from 0 to 1,000 or from 0 to 5,000. The linear scale, this scale linear helps you achieve that. It helps you construct a new continuous scale with a unit domain, the unit range, and the default interpolator and clamping disabled. So let's see how to use it. Going back to my code, I have the D3, I've called the function d3.scaleLinear, and now I'll like to add a domain, and this would be from 0 to 4,000. So on the x-axis, I want it to count from 0 to 4,000, and the range here would be from 0 to the width that I have set, and I want to append this to the SVG I created above. svg.append. Add an attribute to it that says transform translate. By the way, this is a great way of, instead of always adding width and height to your graph, is great to your SVG individually. It's great for you to do this. And I'll assign the height to it. Great. So now the last thing here is to call D3.axis bottom, and my guess is this will place it on the bottom axis X on the graph. That is my guess, but to be sure, let's check the docs. It constructs a new bottom-oriented axis for a given scale with empty ticks, a tick size of 6, and a padding of 3 in the orientation. So this is what it does, what I think it does. In the graph, exactly, in the graph, I think I should decrease the height and increase the width of my graph. So I'm going to say this should be 560 and this should be 300. 350. I think there's something wrong, but probably it's because I have not plotted the y-axis, so that will be the next thing I would like to do, to add the y-axis. So if our y is equals to d3.scale linear then I add the domain. The highest number in our data is over 40,000. So to be safe, I'm just going to say the highest the range should be from, the domain rather should be from 0 to 500k. So domain here will be from 0 to 500,000, and the range should be the height. So it will size it up according to the default height I have set for my graph. 0, height. And then, so I think I added an extra apostrophe that is not supposed to be here. Let's see if that is the case. It's supposed to just be like this. Yeah, so also increase the left padding here, put that back. Yeah, so this looks good. It basically shifted it a bit so I can see the y-axis. So let's go back and check why the y-axis is not showing yet. So I have this as the x-axis and yeah, that should be the opposite height, comma here. Also, I don't think I'm supposed to do this again. I think that is why there is a bit of space. Yeah, that wasn't supposed to be there. I was just only supposed to add that to the x-axis. Yeah, catching up pretty good. So let's move on. So right now I have plotted the x-axis and the y-axis to make my graph more look more presentable and actually communicate meaning to people. I would like to add a text here saying what the x-axis signifies, and also a text to the y-axis saying what it signifies. So let's do that. And my best guess is I will need to append, say dot append text dot attribute. Oh my god, I can't spell. Let's say width to 30. Let me add style. Should be red because I want to try and see if it actually works. And then append the text that says the x-axis showing the sales price in dollars. Let's see if that works, if that changes anything. Svg.append svg.append. I'm not sure if this would help. No. Let's comment this out for a second and see if I can find something in the docs. Now the next step is to add dots to the graph. The dots signifies the correlation between both metrics, the correlation between the sales price and the ground living area. So let's go ahead and do that. So we say I'll append a new group, svg.append, because that's where I want those values to be stored, to be stored and placed on the graph. And then select all attribute, select all dots, and add the data. We want to add the data, and the next step is to enter. So what does enter do in D3? Enter selection is typically used to create a missing element corresponding to new data. So returns. So when you do select all div, data, enter, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. And append, because I want to represent this using circles, I'll append a circle, and I'll add the attribute that I want to add. For a circle, you don't use width and height, you use cx and cy. So the cx for this circle would be what is being returned from the data, and the cx on the x-axis I want to put the sales price. So here I would specify this with return x d dot living area, and the same for y should be sales price. And what else am I adding? A radius, that's the circumference of a circle. So the radius should be, give it 2 and see what that would look like, or 3 or 2 or 3, anyone. And then the next thing, let me style it a bit, add like a color to a fill color to it. And also, what else? Style, give it an opacity of 0.5. Yeah, 0.5. This looks great. So let's see why this isn't being shown on the graph. It's supposed to be shown here. Save this and inspect here. I probably missed something, but yeah, we'll figure that out together. So there is no error in the console, but let's inspect the graph to see what it looks like now. So this is the ID database, and we have the SVG, we have a group. Within that group we have another group. This is for the x-axis, and we have this for the y-axis. So this is empty. So why is it empty? It's not returning anything. So I'm just going to go back here to see. I appended a new graph, and I'm selecting all, dot, passing the data, enter, append, circle, attribute. Let me console the log data again to show. So I'm sure that I'm actually using the right names for the objects that are being returned from the data set. Great. So I have GR. While I try to figure out why the dots are not visible on the chart, I think I know how to add the text, how to make the text visible. That's the description of each axis. So here I'm just going to add an attribute called fill, which is similar to background color in HTML and CSS. Fill, and I'll add the color black. Great, now we can see the description here. I'll just copy that out and paste in the y-axis, so we have the same description, not the same description, but we have it also visible on the y-axis. Great. So now the next step is to figure out why the dots on the graph are not visible. I'm going to try and inspect again to make sure something is being passed into the group element. Why is it not rendering? Yeah, I saw the question here. Dots of Scatterplot in D3 are not rendering. Let's see. This is where he's trying to add his own dot, and we have almost the same thing. The thread function console.log d. Return this in the beginning, but I haven't done it. Functions are executed. This would be my problem too. So from what I see, the data return an object. This is of course not a problem, but the D3 method enter only supports arrays. This means that you cannot have things like this when using enter to add data. Converting them to arrays before using them fixes this. I can use D. Let me see. Is home was saying you return an object instead of an array? I think I'm returning an array, or I'll have to confirm that. Also log data. Oh, I'm returning an object instead of an array, so that is my problem. How did they fix that then? Let me see. Let me try converting the data from an object to an array and see if that would fix it for me. So I'm not quite sure why this worked. I did a couple of research on how to convert a string to an object to an array, but by just adding square brackets to data, it works. It fixes the bug that I was experiencing. Let's see if that works again this time. Yeah. So I'm not sure what the difference between having this, because when I console.log, let me just try this once more. Type of data. See why we don't. Yeah, it's still an object, but yeah, it fixes it. So something else I would like to change here is, so because the data set I have has so many values, it's not making the Scatterplot as interesting as I wanted it to be. So I'm just going to filter the data and return just 50 results, and just return 50 results and see how that goes. Alright, so I figured out how I could actually transform the data from an object to an array using the object.values array method. So when I console.log this, you can see now that the output returned is an array, but the difference here is I'll have to get the first and the second array. So the first one will be plotted on the x-axis and the second one will be plotted on the y-axis. So I'll just go down here where I have my data, instead of what we had before that said D, I won't be passing anything here anymore. So now I will just pass in the first index, which is 0, and the second index, which is 1. So for all values on the x-axis, would give it the first index in the array, and for all values in the second axis, in the y-axis, we'll give it all values in the second array. And here we have the graph plotted. By the way, I also went ahead to add what we call a tooltip. So if you hover on any one of these circles, you get a description saying the exact value of the ground living area is 2332. So how I did that is by appending a tooltip to each of the dots, and I'm adding a mouse over. Whenever I mouse over on it, it changes the opacity to 1. When I move my mouse, it changes it to 0. When I move my mouse around it, you can see when I move my mouse around, it changes the location of the tooltip, and when I move my mouse out, it changes the opacity to 0. The last thing I would like to do in this graph is to reduce the number of dots shown here, so it makes the graph more clearer. Great. So I had an issue that I was trying to fix with the result of the CSV returning object instead of an array of objects. But fix that now, and here I am filtering the data to only return 50, a range of 50 data sets. So now our chart is more presentable, and we have this correlation between the ground living area and the price. So now we know the ground living area for this is, the value of the ground living area for this is $8,317. So yeah, makes sense. So this was fun building this out. I hope to level up more on D3 and build more charts, more exciting charts. Thank you so much for sticking around throughout this video. Yeah, and see you later. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and also like this video if you want to see this kind of video from me. I'm also thinking of doing more live stream content, so if that is something you'd like to see, just let me know in the comment section. Thank you.